To keep a bit of the tone from the last video, I decided to kick off 2023 with another investigation game, more specifically Unheard, a 2019 detective puzzle game with a twist, coming to you from the Chinese Next Studios. Starting the year with a Tencent game, now that's a controversy-free way to go about it. The twist comes from its very distinct gameplay mechanic. You're neither interrogating suspects nor collecting evidence, instead the bread and butter are what the game likes to call acoustic detective system. It's the ability to explore where a crime occurred and listen to everything said and done at the time. You get an avatar that can move at will between rooms, eavesdropping to your heart's content and able to move the recording forwards and backwards as you see fit. After watching the entire case, you're tasked with correctly identifying each person of interest and answering each case's inquiries. It's undoubtedly a flashy way to handle it, especially when you consider that each sound source is correctly reflected by the game's audio output.
As soon as that's done, we'll get started.
Will do.
Who's that knocking? Ray?
Granted, even if headphones are recommended since they undoubtedly do a better job reproducing the spatial aspect of the audio, they're not going to give you a gameplay advantage. There are multiple reasons I say this. Firstly, every time a character speaks, their icon on the map is animated accordingly. Thus, knowing who is talking at any given time is a formality. Secondly, since you're free to pause, rewind, or fast forward, getting it right the first time you hear each conversation is not that important. In fact, doing this is unavoidable because you're bound to have to re-listen to the whole recording multiple times from different rooms to fully understand the big picture. At the same time, while skipping over quiet sections, the game does a really good job of highlighting when things pick up again. Things like this make the overall experience of watching the recording smooth and responsive. Ironically, it makes watching videos on YouTube feel choppy and slow in comparison. This doesn't change the fact that the spatial audio is only a gimmick with no bearing on gameplay. Last reason why it doesn't matter if you use headphones or not is because, well, the system has limitations anyway. Yes, it's cool to notice how the sound's orientation changes as you move your avatar, but that being said, in some instances the sound mixing is not helping things. More precisely, if there are multiple conversations in a room simultaneously, making sense of what's being said will be challenging to say the least. Because even if you position your avatar inches away from someone, the sound level of people further away is still high enough to drown out any sense of clarity. There's one particular mission where it is difficult to understand the vital part of the events because you've got 3 simultaneous conversations taking place one next to another.
Oh, you again? That's gotta be a record.
Why are you here?
Seem to have misplaced it again.
Another issue is that the sound system is room-based instead of being adjusted solely on proximity and obstructions. This is falling closer to nitpicking than what I said before, and I understand that the latter option would have been a lot more tricky to program. But this design choice has consequences both in gameplay and immersion. The thing is that your avatar can hear everything that happens in a room. It doesn't matter how big the room is, its shape has no relevance, and obstacles such as thick walls won't stop you from hearing what's being said from around the corner perfectly. Unfortunately, this also means that you cannot hear anything said past the door. Unless the script involves a person knocking on a door and shouting to the other room, they act as perfect sound insulators. It's not just doors either. You can have prison bars or even an open crossing, and you're still utterly incapable of hearing anything from the other side. It's particularly grating when you must follow characters that cross between rooms mid-conversation.
Crying out loud. You really think you're a caregiver?
I need to go look for someone. Look for them.
But I am aware this approach avoids situations where characters could have heard conversation they shouldn't really have. But in reality, this goes back to the issues in sound mixing and low volume decay over distance more than anything else. We can focus on a sound source and ignore anything else in the real world. Look at the example of 3 simultaneous conversations I've given earlier, for instance. It's a tame scenario compared to what we encounter daily in places like public transport, pubs, office kitchens, and so on. And yet, we can understand what people are saying even if 5 or more different people are speaking within the audible range. In-game, you might as well turn the sound off because you'll understand just as much. These situations make me wish there was a way to mute individual characters. It would have made the experience much more bearable. Despite the time I spent criticizing it, the system does have its merits. It forces you to pay close attention to details, since in the end, accuracy is required to successfully pass a mission. For instance, you need to point out each person's name, and most of the time, they want to just blurt them out for your convenience. It's nice that sometimes you never hear someone's name, thus forcing you into making an educated guess. The best part is that the game isn't afraid of misdirecting you, since you have situations where a character isn't who he claims to be. So, even more reasons to be vigilant and use your intuition as much as possible. This goes the same for the clues regarding objects. Sometimes they're passed between characters, stolen, placed somewhere only to be found later by someone else, and so on. Since you cannot visualize these moments, these sounds are the only ones to clue you in. Couldn't make it more than 7 minutes without making a shitty pun. You're welcome. While the sound system is a standout feature, it would only matter if mysteries were well designed. Fortunately for Unheard, they are actually exciting to go through. The first 2 levels are straightforward tutorial missions, but each introduces 2 concepts worth mentioning. In the first mission, you're witnessing a police interrogation of a man who was brought in for drug possession. It seems like an innocuous case until you realize that the man is not who he claims to be, but his twin brother. And to further drive in the twist, the other twin brother, that's not present in the interrogation room, is the one who planted the evidence so he could take control of the family business from the person who was interrogated. This kind of multi-layered fake-outs will be seen on each level, and they're entertaining to process mentally. The later levels are quite the brain twisters, but fortunately they're logical. Only a few times I felt the logical stretches were a bit too much, but otherwise there's no moon logic in Unheard. The second mission involves the theft of a painting at an art gallery. In this case, the twist comes from multiple parties interested in stealing or switching out the original work, and more surprisingly, the artist himself is the one who orchestrated all of this. Because of this, each person acts independently from one another and manages the performance of switching the original painting back and forth, with everyone believing they hold the real deal until the final reveal at the end of the recording. This ridiculous switcheroo demands sharp attention before you can get it right. In one later mission, this is employed with remarkable effect when multiple guns are passed back and forth between several characters before realizing that all but one are actually prop guns. The following missions up the complexity of these concepts to a much greater level, and the game is better for it. The plot lines of each character are interesting and complex enough to keep you engaged. The writing is done in a way that's informative enough to give you an idea of what's going on, but not outright say all the minute details. The fact that you've got multiple conflicting interests between characters serves to further complicate matters. Their plans get tangled into each other, sometimes in a wild mix of opportunism and incompetence, leaving most of them confused just as you are after the first listen of each recording. They're fun to observe and figure out as you progress through each. And because of that, it's a massive shame that there are only 6 levels in total. This includes a free DLC mission that is a pleasure to go through due to it being the most complex and with the most elaborately layered plots. It's very annoying to feel that the developers are barely starting to scratch the depth of their mechanics only to wrap things up just as the levels are becoming much more intriguing. It gives the impression of a proof of concept title more than anything else, and the price of Unheard plays a role in that feeling. There are 2 more DLC missions, but they're only in Chinese, so you can only complete them if you speak the language. And no, being Chiling does not really count as being fluent. Another disappointment is the way the end of mission questions are handled. In most cases, if you don't get one right, you can easily brute force by picking each other option until you get the correct answer and solve the mystery. It's a pretty lame and counterintuitive approach to a detective puzzle game, but at least as long as you refrain from abusing it, it won't affect your experience. Later levels and the DLC solve this problem by having many characters alongside multiple choice and pick the correct sequence questions, so it becomes a less viable tactic, fortunately. Overall, Unheard is a concept with an excellent potential that is well executed, that's quite obvious, but it's so short that I'm left more frustrated than if the game was handled poorly, as ironic as this may sound. The good part is that it's dirt cheap and its better features are done well enough to be worth a visit if you're into brain teasers. With that being said, thanks for watching the video. It never hurts to have a short video every now and then, especially when you're getting interesting mechanics to talk about. Next video will be about something more well known, so stay tuned for that. Like, subscribe, share this with your like-minded fellows. And until next time, cheers!